Welcome to Resolving Reality. My name is Emmett, the creator of the website www.resolvingreality.com and host of this podcast, Resolving Reality Radio. Resolving Reality is an independent Irish media platform that examines national and global issues, featuring opinions and topics not covered in the mainstream media, including the alternative, the politically incorrect, the undiscovered and the ignored. Check out the website for all our social media links and platforms, which you can find in the footer on each page. Follow us on Twitter @ResolvingOr, both capital Rs. Find us on YouTube, where you can find the podcasts, but soon also our video content, and make sure to like, comment, share and subscribe. We are on Mixcloud, but if you prefer to listen to the podcast in higher quality WAV audio, click on the SoundCloud icon to visit the Resolving Reality SoundCloud profile, where you can download the episodes in high quality as well. Resolving Reality Radio is now on Stitcher and iTunes, plus check out our BitChute profile and you will find all those links right there on the website www.resolvingreality.com. This is Resolving Reality Radio. This is episode 5 of Resolving Reality Radio, and I'm speaking to Andy Thomas of the website www.truthagenda.org. Andy is an author and lecturer covering a wide variety of topics, including unexplained mysteries and global cover-ups, history and British folklore, to name a few. He has authored many books, including the much acclaimed The Truth Agenda and another called Conspiracies. He has also written several books on the crop circle phenomenon, including a highly respected book on the subject called Vital Signs. Check out Andy's website for more information on him and his work, his articles and videos, plus how to buy his books, and that's all on his website www.truthagenda.org. In this episode, we discuss the subjects of truth in the modern world, the media and how it distorts reality, and the impact of the internet on truth discovery and how the control system is trying to suppress it. We also talk about the crop circle phenomenon, its beginnings, where the formations appear, the various theories for their origins, how the establishment responds, the information or messages contained in the crop formations, and the possible involvement of the so-called elites. You are listening to Resolving Reality Radio. Stay tuned for much more. Hello Andy, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great, thanks for being here. I know you're a busy man, and we've been trying to organise this for a little while here, but here we are. So I know you for being a man of many things. I know you're a researcher, public speaker, and you've authored many books covering like a nice wide variety of topics. Crop circles, of course, unexplained mysteries, global cover-ups, and conspiracies, and English history as well. Plus, you've got a great website, truthagenda.org. And I know you're still a very prolific public speaker on a wide variety of subjects also. I take it that's been keeping you busy recently, like lots of travelling around, stuff like that?
It does, and I give the talks on conspiracy theories and the paranormal, but I also do history talks as well. And this time of the year, because I'm really interested in English folklore and traditions and things like that, I give a lot of talks about Christmas and the history of that, which is much more fascinating than some people might think. So that is something that's been keeping me busy the last few weeks. But of course, that's nearly over, and back to conspiracies very soon.
That's amazing, yeah, because, when we spoke before, I really like my alternative topics, and I couldn't even categorize you, which is funny, because I'm quite good at that, and you really are an all-rounder, which is great for you as well, I suppose, because you get to kind of, cover different things. I've also had the pleasure of seeing you do your presentation live, one of them, down in Waterford at the Open Minds Conference. I think it was the start of November. It was the history of conspiracies. And, it was a great presentation, definitely one of the best of the weekend. And you have a really interesting style. It's quite very kind of neutral. You have a way of presenting the information it's really good for people who are new to this stuff as well. Is that something that you made a conscious decision to do, or did you just develop this way organically as a speaker?
I think that the way that I present the subjects that I'm interested in is an honest way, because, there are some areas where clearly there are things that need investigation, but knowing 100% what the actual full truth is another matter. So what I do is, if I'm not 100% sure of the full truth, I will say what I feel about it, say what I think the evidence is, and try to stay balanced. I mean, if I have a very firm opinion on something, then I will give it. But I do find that what you tend to find in the world of sort of truth and mysteries research is that people get very dogmatic. So they get fixed onto sort of one belief, and then that becomes something which they then sort of fight other people with. And that, to me, it closes people down. And I think anybody on the outside of that, as soon as they see anybody getting very sort of hard about the way they're trying to push that truth out there, they tend to actually shut down. And I found the best way to offer this stuff to people is to offer it as my truth and as possible things that they might want to think about. So it's not that I'm being wishy-washy. It's not that I'm just sitting on the fence. I just try to be honest. If I believe something is 100% the way that it might seem to be, I will say that. But I mean, that's why, my book, one of them, and the website, I call it the Truth Agenda, because it's trying to get to, look, what is truth? And, there are clearly agendas to subvert the truth out there. So we're trying to turn that around and say, okay, let's find what the truth is. And if the truth is that we're not sure, but hey, look at this is really interesting, then to me that is where I will go with it, and I will present it that way.
Yeah, that's a great balanced way to be. And you're, inevitably when you kind of present information with a certain opinion already, you're trying to force the audience to look at it a certain way. You're already creating opposite sides of a debate, like the political, dialectics of left and right, for example, stuff like that. If you immediately present yourself on one side, the other side is inclined to see as the enemy almost, and they may not be open with you and have a neutral kind of chat.
I think that's true. And I think it's a shame because, especially in the truth-seeking world, for want of a better term, we have something here which we can all agree on, which is that what's being pumped out there in the mainstream media and what we're getting from the authorities is 9 times out of 10 not the truth or not the whole truth. But once you start squabbling, and then because somebody over there thinks that you are not being quite firm enough in what you're saying, and therefore you're a shill and all the rest of it, it all collapses in on itself, and it doesn't help anybody. And at the end of the day, it weakens it. So I think we all need to be tolerant of different approaches. And some people are very, very strong and very fiery in the way they put their stuff out there, which is fine, but they shouldn't attack other people, I think, if they have a different method of doing it. So I try to remain as inclusive as possible. And as you say, try and leave this stuff there so that you're not shutting people down from the start. You're saying, here's how I feel about it, but here are the two sides that are going on. What side looks most likely to you? And people will soon make their own minds up anyway.
Yeah, and it's a great strategy, and it is very balanced, like I say. And I suppose not everyone is on the same level as well. And I really saw that at the conference we were at. It was like, some people are newer to quote unquote alternative subjects. Some people have been on the wagon a long time, and certain things may come across as, well, maybe shocking or definitely kind of maybe provocative sometimes, and you're going to have those emotional reactions. So yeah, I think your strategy works really well. But is there any areas that you think of the stuff that you cover in particular that you think people should really pay attention to? In terms of I suppose just understanding the world at large.
Well, I mean, I have sort of two strands to what I do in this area. So one is very much looking at conspiracies, especially the history of them. Because when you understand the patterns of conspiracy and belief in conspiracy that's come right down from the earliest times, you can put into context what is going on now. And I think that's a really crucial thing to do. So, I'm always trying to show people, look, this is not new. Mistrust in authority is not new. So let's look at what's happened in the past. And now let's look at what's going on now and see if we can see that, there are some clear anomalies glaring at us. And I mean, there are some very good examples of that, one of which in my view, would be 9/11, for instance, where no matter what your view on the actual events, there is no question that the official story is a lie. And I think this can be demonstrated very, very quickly. So that is something I don't sit on the fence with at all. And I use that as a good example of making people understand that, whatever your personal view of what might have happened, the official version isn't true. And then the other strand is that, I began really in this world with looking at the perceived paranormal, UFOs, crop circles, that kind of thing. And again, whatever your view on those things, and of course, many people get very hot under the collar about them. What you can demonstrate is that what the mainstream tells people about these things is a lie. Whether you believe all crop circles are man-made or not, unquestionably they have been misrepresented and lies are told about them. And that is very similar with UFOs and other areas like that. So that is something else that you can just show by literally discussing evidence, not just belief, but actually the available evidence that what's being pumped out there by the press, by the TV, is simply not the true story. And again, it leaves people then hopefully coming to their own decision that, okay, there are other places we need to look for to get to the bottom of what's going on here. And anybody that can help open a door towards that, even slightly, I think is doing the world a favor.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's great. You're absolutely right when you say patterns, and because it is really the same old story. And when I say people are new to this stuff, it's only because they've just come in contact with it, perhaps. But this sort of stuff has been going on a long time, of course, because truth is always. I like that you've got that. I mean, I've got reality in my website title, but you've got truth, and they're both kind of the same thing, and they're both extremely relevant. So whichever event we're talking about or subject we're talking about, there is a truth behind it that's kind of waiting to be discovered.
That is definitely true. And I mean, obviously, reality is a subjective thing, although that seems to get forgotten these days. And what I think we're seeing a lot of at the moment is a kind of an academic elite, a very self-elected academic elite, who have decided that they will only discuss anything in this very narrow band in front of them. Anything that falls outside of that does not exist or is only believed in by people who are in some way mentally damaged or incapable of assessing evidence. And that is so unfair. And what they have done is they've backed themselves into a place where they are not hearing evidence. Very often the academic elite, which of course has huge influence over the media, and that's why we tend to only hear from them, what they do is filter their reality in exactly the same way that they accuse others of doing. They are just as guilty of blotting out things that don't fit with their view as all the people like us that they would accuse of that. And I think that is a dangerous situation to be in. And I do get concerned when there is such a wave, especially now in the wake of the whole fake news scandal. There is such a wave of the mainstream saying this is reality. What we have declared here is reality. Anything beyond that is not reality. And of course, because they get the word out there, because they have so much coverage and they have so many conduits, you can almost brainwash the population, or a fair amount of it, into believing that. But of course, that is not necessarily true. And just because a majority of the population believes something doesn't make it true. If that were true, back in the earlier ancient times, everybody would have thought, for instance, that the sun revolved around the earth rather than the other way around. Do you know what I mean? So just because lots of people believe something doesn't actually make it true. But we are seeing, I think, a very bad editing going on. And what they do is misrepresent anything that questions their reality and then says that, we are delusional. But I'm afraid evidence speaks for itself. And there are certainly many areas that you can pick out where you can demonstrate the official story is not true. And that is why I try to concentrate on those areas where you can demonstrate that. And then people, well, once you show it to them, they can see that for themselves and they're going to realize for themselves what's going on. So you don't need to do too much to show that to people, but you just need to break them out of the spell of only listening to this elite.
Yeah. It's amazing. Because in a way, it's so simple, but it's so important, and it's almost like people need to just change their state of mind slightly and become a little bit more open minded, but also a little bit more suspicious, and kind of getting that balance between being open minded and skeptical and making up your own minds. Do you think as well that nowadays it's like, because of the advent of the internet and the expansion and how it's enabled this free flow of information, that it's like the control system is now kind of upping the ante on their side and trying to control the flow of information and keep people more brainwashed? You know what I mean?
I do. And sadly, yes, you are right. I think that we've lived in a kind of a halcyon sort of period where we were able to exchange a lot of information on the internet that is now being censored. In effect, that is what's happening. Because especially since the fake news thing burst open, that was a gift to those that would shut down open conversation. It's almost like, the internet, if you like, it evolved to become something that I don't think anybody had considered at the beginning. And once the genie was out of the bottle, those in places of authority, or those in those academic elites that feel very threatened by anybody challenging them, they've been looking desperately for a way to put that genie back in the bottle, and now they found it. And because of alleged fake news, which again very often will be subjective, of course, they've got it. And now you've got things like social media and Facebook and Twitter and whatnot taking away any links to anything they perceive as fake news. Well, funnily enough, that involves anything that questions the official version of events. A lot of alternative information is now gradually getting pushed further and further down Google searches. Don't trust Google searches. Do try some other search engines. And if you take YouTube, it's getting taken down now, often on very spurious reasons. For instance, they'll say, oh, there was a copyright issue, or, the other thing is what they do is they won't allow you to have any advertising. No advertisers will support a certain subject. But of course, that means in the end, for people that spend a lot of time and money making these documentaries or whatever, they can't get anything back from it. So it makes it harder for them to get this stuff out there. So it's subtle. They haven't said we are banning the internet, but that is what's happening. Sadly, we are now in a time when it's suddenly become very clear that if they have their way, we will lose this conduit that we've had very much for the last 20 years or so. So, yeah, we are in concerning times at the moment. And anybody who has, an issue around this, they need to make a noise. They need to campaign. They need to stop this going any further, because it's going to get to a point where actually, effectively, the mainstream internet is useless for the likes of you and me, and it's all going to go into a strange backwater where we will, of course, be sort of characterized as the dangerous people who don't read those websites, whatever you do. But equally, you will never get a mainstream link into things like Facebook anymore. So this is going on now as we speak, and I think it is a dangerous time, and it's a great shame.
Yeah. I suppose the only way forward is just to keep on trucking and try not to consolidate all of our stuff in the one place. And YouTube is really taken off, of course, and it's the hub of many things. But I mean, I myself are trying to focus on the website. Like, you've got your own site. It's so important to have that sort of independence from it all. I know this is one of the subjects you're mostly known for, and there's loads of things I could question you on. But let's talk about crop circles for a little bit. And I know you've been over this for decades now, so I'll try to keep it fresh for you, and I have some questions that I'll try to get to the core of the matter for sure. But just for the basics, for anyone who's new to this, will we just start with how and why you got into crop circles in the first place, Andy?
I mean, I think this is where the value of things like crop circles can be, because certainly for me, they were my conduit into this world, if you like. The thing with a crop circle is it sits there in the field and looks very pretty and very spectacular, and it immediately calls anybody with half an ounce of inquiry in their minds. So for me, it was back in the summer of 1991, and I was traveling in Wiltshire, and I was just astonished. I mean, I'd heard of crop circles, but it wasn't until I saw them and then realized that, as you drove around, you could virtually see a crop formation on every horizon that summer. I realized there's something going on here which needs more attention. And so I very quickly came to the conclusion that nobody knew what was going on, and I wanted to know more. Now, I didn't know what was going on back then, and here I am, nearly 28 years on, or whatever it is, and I still don't know what's going on. But I do know, and I saw this very quickly, that what was being represented in the mainstream press, especially, wasn't true. Now, at the end of the summer that I got very excited about all of this, there was a great big debunk, which some people will remember, where these two retired gentlemen calling themselves Doug and Dave said they'd made all of the crop circles themselves, they'd begun the whole thing. And although that was very quickly obviously not true, because there were so many things that did not explain, it was very damaging in the eyes of the public. People went, oh, right, just a big joke, because of course, very often the public will never stop to look at the evidence. It's very quick to believe something without considering why it's believing it. So that then began, where we're at today, really, that belief, well, all or nearly all crop circles are man-made. And clearly, many are man-made. Nobody would deny that. We know there are man-made formations. But what was clear to myself and the colleagues that I started working with, and I became very involved with what was then the Centre for Crop Circle Studies, was that, hang on a minute, there are so many things here that are simply not explained by the debunking. And to this day, that is where it remains. Now, some people would have you believe it's still absolutely all man-made, it's all a big joke, but there are still things they cannot explain. And that's why here we are, like crop circles have been in the mainstream since about 1990. That's when it hit really big. They've been around before, but that's when it hit the papers. And here we are, we're still talking about them. Why? Because they have not been resolved, not all of them. There are so many sightings. You've got eyewitnesses, people who watch them appear within seconds. You've got biological anomalies occurring in some formations in the plants. You've got balls of light flying around them. You've got videos of them appearing. And of course, it's all very contentious, but it's very hard to explain it all away. And I think this is the thing. So you start with getting involved with that. And whatever you conclude about crop circles, certainly for me, I realized the truth is not being told. And then I started to meet other people involved in that world, and then UFOs and all of this, who were also finding that their own areas of interest were not being accurately represented out there in the wider world. And that's when you go, aha, right, that's the connecting factor here. And what crop circles do is they take you down that journey of realizing, right, there's clearly something that the world of the mainstream does not want people to be discussing. And of course, the minute you know they don't want you to discuss something is when you know there's something to discuss. And that then opens the door to questioning anything and everything. And in the years since, of course, I have. So I'm really perhaps better known in many circles, if you pardon the pun now, for investigating conspiracies and trying to get to the truth of some pretty big global events. But it began with simply wondering, what the hell is that strange pattern doing in the field? And they still do that to people now. People still being awakened by them, irrespective of what their real origin is. And I think that's one of the fun things about them.
Yeah, that's amazing. You're right that it hasn't really been resolved. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of people are the same way, where I look at something and I'm like, well, of course we need to know how has it come to be? How are these things actually made? Like, what's their origin? And there's been, from what I can see, there's been kind of a few different camps or different kind of theories. Obviously you've got people who think it might be those with boards and strings, and others believe it's extraterrestrials. And but what kind of other categories of theories are there, Andy? I think there's weather phenomenon as well, and what else?
I think this is one of the interesting things about it, which is this, that they're very hard to categorize because there are so many possible theories and there are so many observable factors to them. And I suspect that the ultimate answer to all of this is going to be a blend of a number of different theories. Because, so yes, you've outlined a few there. If you disregard the ones that say they're all man-made just for a minute, you've then got to consider, well, what might make them? So you've got some who say they are intelligent interventions, either from extraterrestrials or maybe extra dimensionals, or, something from some other realm. But also you then have to factor that in. certainly meteorological phenomena that might explain some of the simple formations. You then have a geological factor, because if you look at where the main distribution of, say, certainly the crop circles in Britain are, nearly all of them follow what are known as the aquifers. Now, an aquifer is any rock that carries a lot of water under the ground, and there's a clear correlation. So that's strange, because if they were all a big hoax, you could make them anywhere, and it doesn't work like that. Again and again, they're coming back to these areas where the underground water is. And it's not to do with the amount of crop being grown. There are many, many areas full of crop fields that don't get crop circles, and they are not around underground water. So you've got some clear geological thing there. But the other factor is, many people have found, and I myself was involved with some of this work back in the 1990s, is that you can almost interact with the phenomenon in what you might call on a psychic level. There have been many experiments, people trying to interact with whatever's going on. The more we did those, the more strange things happened to us. Many of us saw balls of light. We had a formation appear in exactly the shape that we had predicted from doing this experiment, sitting up on a hillside. We didn't make it, by the way. We also had, at the beginning of our experiments, we had a big meeting held in secret at the house of a man called Paul Bura, who's now no longer with us, but he was, a key part of this. And in the field, as near as you could get to his house that day we started, a secret meeting, bear in mind, a formation appeared in that very field as near to him as you could get. It was like there was something responding to us. Now, I can't tell you what it was, but there is an interactive quality, and many other people have found this too. And there are many, many other theories we could go into here, but that gives you a flavor. And you have to stand back and say, okay, there's something quite odd here. And that's the thing, just explaining all of these things away by saying it's all a man with a plank of wood, or indeed a woman with a plank of wood, it doesn't cut it. Yeah, we know some are made like that, of course, but there are so many things that are not explained that way. And that's why it's such a fascinating phenomenon, and why I think it will continue to be a fascinating phenomenon.
I like stuff like this where it's a real mental challenge. So like you're saying, it could be a combination of different theories, and indeed not all of them are the same. And I'm open-minded as the next person, as that some of them could be man-made, some not, and others could be, from other kind of causes involved there. And I like this stuff. It's a real kind of mental challenge. And also as well, there's a connection between them. You mentioned a aquiferous rock being underground, but also the Salisbury Plain area has a bit of significance, doesn't it, I think? And I know you know your history. I know Stonehenge is located there. There's maybe some druidic stuff going on. Is there a connection between them and the location for those reasons as well?
There's definitely a connection with ancient sites, although that might relate to the aquifers, because certainly you seem to get crop circles often clustering in areas where you get a lot of ancient stone circles and barrows and burial mounds and all of this, which of course Wiltshire is very rich in. If we presume that ancient man marked those areas because they were picking up earth energy, or they could sense the water, or whatever it is, maybe, of course, if crop circles are also connected with those same factors, that would explain why they tend to cluster in the same places. I mean, there is even a theory that perhaps ancient man saw crop circles, because a lot of people think crop circles have been going on for a long time, maybe forever. We've got records clearly going back to the 1600s at least. What if ancient man saw a mark in the field and assumed the gods had come down there and marked them? Because it's been observed that the geometrical layout of some stone circles and stone complexes have some correlations with the geometrical layout of crop circles. So that's another interesting idea. But you mentioned Salisbury Plain. I mean, of course, another theory says, well, you got the military up the road. And some have often said, well, could it just be a military thing? The military are certainly interested. Many tales of helicopters coming down and observing them and clearly recording them. So, they'd be foolish not to be interested. As to whether they make them, in my view, I don't think that's the answer, or certainly not the whole answer. I know people like Richard D. Hall has put that forward as an idea. My question to that would be, if they are all being made for military purposes, A, haven't they got something better to do? B, if they are testing some secret technology, which is what some say, why not test it secretly? There's a lot of land they could do that on and not reveal it to us. So there are many things that doesn't really explain, unless it's all some weird double bluff to make us think aliens are coming. But then you have to say, yeah, but they've done such a good job with the debunking. They seem to have somewhat neutralized that, if that was the idea. So I don't think that entirely makes sense either. But I certainly think the military are interested. And yeah, I mean, with Salisbury playing up the road, of course, it does make you wonder why the military went there in the first place. Were they trying to tap into something, or was it just that it was nice open land? There are many ways you can argue this around.
Yeah, and it's if it is some sort of a conspiracy or a hoax perpetrated by the authorities and the military, then there's a multiple layers to it. If they're going to do something like that and then debunk it, then there has to be multiple layers to this. And so how about for someone who's new to this stuff, then we break it down. How would you be able to tell the fake ones from the more mysterious ones? There has to surely be giveaways that can, tell us straight away that it's people with boards and strings.
I mean, certainly one thing that's been noticed over the years, when you look at man-made formations close up, and ones that we know for a fact are man-made, you tend to get crease marks on the crop. The damage, it does tend to be very obvious, especially in rapeseed or canola, the yellow stuff, which damages really easily. And yet, we've seen other formations that are absolutely pristine. And if you walk in a rapeseed formation, the first thing you'll do is just leave big footprints in it. It pops, it cracks, it snaps under your feet. But I have been into brand new formations in that crop where you can just see nothing has touched it. It's not a scuff on the stem. You often get a bloom, like a silvery film that grows on the stem or the leaf in both rapeseed and wheat crops, barley, things like that. You've only got to touch it with your finger and you can leave a mark. So when you start walking on it and crunching around with bits of wood, it's generally clear when something's been thrashed down. Now, that is not the same as saying you can instantly make a decision. Unless you have been present when a formation was man-made and you have watched it being man-made, you can never say 100% for sure one way or the other. And I've always been careful with that over the years, because in the earlier times, when you had some of the early researchers who sort of made a name for themselves in the press, of course, when the Doug and Dave debunk kicked off, they were the targets, and they had sort of very loudly said, I can always tell the difference. Well, then people were trying to catch them out, and it all got very difficult. So what myself and the colleagues that I've been working with for years have done is just stood back and say, what we're going to do is observe what we find. Was the crop neat? Yes, no. Was there damage? Yes, no. There are things like layering. I mean, we have found over the years, you lift up a layer of crop going in one direction, there are layers going underneath in other directions. There are weaves. There are bits that have clearly been woven where you just cannot see how that was achieved with a piece of wood. So what I've always tried to do is just observe and say, we noticed this, and leave it at that. I cannot, unless I was there when it was made, either by supernatural forces or by people, I cannot say 100%. And I think, that can be hubris, and people have fallen down over that one. But I do think that you can weigh up evidence and come to a fairly reasonable conclusion. And some of them, especially geometrically, are just staggering. I mean, when you look at some of the man-made formations and how long it has taken them to make them, we know that many very elaborate formations have occurred in very short periods of time, less than an hour. And yet you see people making them, and they're taking, up to 8-9 hours, sometimes 2 days to make these things. And it's that time factor, which is another thing. And I mean, bear in mind, of course, the eyewitnesses have reported these things appearing literally within a matter of seconds. And I've interviewed a number of these eyewitnesses, and I believe them to be telling the truth. They're quite consistent, and I see no reason why some of these people should have made it up, because all that's happened to them is they've got ridicule. So this is the kind of stuff you have to sort of stack it up and see where the probability of evidence lies, which you have to do with a lot of things, including conspiracy theories. I mean, you may not know 100%, for instance, what happened on 9/11, but you can certainly show what didn't happen on 9/11, and you can certainly stack up areas which show clear anomalies that are not explained by the official account, and so on. And you can do that with a number of areas too. So that's the approach to take, rather than declaring it this or that. If people want to do that, that is fine. But I personally choose not to do that. But it speaks for itself at the end.
It's always, of course, wise. Well, I suppose it's a lesson in life, isn't it? It's always good to just be reserved and have that amount of wisdom to just take a break for a moment and without jumping to conclusions. And like you said, I'm sure it would have caused these, back in the early days, or people falling into that trap of just making a commitment straight away to one side or the other. As well, there's the how people kind of regard some of them as being definitely not people with boards and strings, the more, quote unquote mysterious ones, that people have strange effects, like and it affects animals as well in the environment. People are being ill or having these emotional kind of reactions. Tell us about that.
I mean, that's something which has been noticed for a long time. And yeah, I mean, it affects different people differently. And I think some people are more sensitive to it than others. But there are some people who've claimed all kinds of health effects inside crop circles. Now, some have claimed miracle cures inside. Others have come out and been really ill. Now, that could be psychosomatic. It could be a reaction to pesticide, pesticide allergies, they do occur. But then there are things you can't explain that way. I mean, electronics, things like cameras and phones, for instance, they seem to go wrong inside crop circles above statistical chance and then work fine when you come outside. There are readings from electrostatic meters, all kinds of things that have been taken inside. Compasses often go wild. There are magnetic anomalies which have been found in them. Now, none of that is proof of anything, but it does seem to occur more, I think, than chance would dictate. And I mean, there's a lady called Lucy Pringle, who is a very well-known crop circle researcher who's been keeping records of people recording strange health effects in crop circles, and it is pretty impressive just how many people do say that they've had some quite extraordinary things happening to them. So, whatever's going on here, whatever's causing that, whether it's the formation itself or the energies, terrible word, but for want of a better word, the energies inside them or something else linked to it, or the ground itself, is another matter. But there's something about that combination of standing in that shape, in that spot, that often can do strange things.
That kind of evidence you were talking about, with especially when it comes to electronics and things like that malfunctioning, kind of lends more towards, the presence of radiation or magnetism. Magnetism, I can't speak. And that kind of makes me think whatever's going on there, it seems like there's some sort of advanced technology involved or whatever created them. I know it sounds like I'm committing to an explanation here, but it kind of leans that way when we're talking about malfunctioning equipment.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the only caveat that I would put in there is that, we know that electromagnetic anomalies can occur in the weather. They can be due to extreme weather or strange conditions. We also know, and I think this is something that's easy to forget, that in some fields you get radon. There are natural elements that can disrupt things. So we need to be aware of that. Nonetheless, you are certainly not alone in believing that it could be the sign of some higher technology. Yes, to be sure. But certainly, whichever way you want to look at it, that there is something which I think should not be disregarded. What would be very useful, though, is one day to get a control reading of a field before the formation appeared, and then take readings inside and see who reacted, and see whether just standing on that spot would give you a feeling or give you strange effects anyway. And again, I mean, if a dowser would tell you that the Earth is rich in earth energies, these natural energy lines and all of this, which many people believe crop circles are inextricably linked with. So it might be that it's, as much as being the formation itself, it's that actual spot which may be energetically, very active, if you like, even without the formation. But many would say they feel that the crop formation amplifies that effect. The skeptics would, of course, say it's all imagination, we're all bonkers. But there you go. We're used to that.
Yeah. Water off a duck's back at this stage. In terms of the sophistication of the designs, I mean, I know there's definitely been changes. Has it been a massive? I'm not sure when the earliest crop circles were, but since the first recorded crop circles and now, has there been a massive change in the level of complexity of the designs?
I mean, the earliest clear record we've got, there are claims of earlier ones, but the earliest clear one is what is called the mowing devil. And it's an illustration that went with a report in a pamphlet, which was published in Hertfordshire in England in 1678. And it shows a picture of the devil clearly making what we would today call a crop circle. The account also clearly describes a crop circle, even to the point where it says that on the night of its appearance, the sky was all of a flame. Now, even today, people often describe light phenomena coming down from the sky into the field where the formations are found. So you've even got that strange light connection back there. So there are, I would say, a few hundred historical accounts of crop circles. There's a very good book by Terry Wilson, which I think you can get as an e-download on Amazon, The Secret History of Crop Circles, that is as good a record of all of these things as anything. They're largely circles or rings with occasional other shapes. This builds up, and then you get into the 1970s, and whether it's because more are appearing or people just start to investigate them, I don't know. But it's as if it seems to sort of step up in numbers, and you get a little bit more complexity, a few more rings around a circle, and then bang, right at the end of 1989, the last formation of that summer was a circle, but it was swept into 4 quarters. Now, hitherto, everyone has said, well, it's whirlwinds. It's a purely natural thing. But the minute you get a circle swept in 4 quarters, that's not a whirlwind. And immediately that makes people think, there's something else going on here. And that turned out to be the prelude, because in the summer of 1990, when they came back, immediately there were these huge, very complex, very hieroglyphic looking shapes, like the one that's on the front of the Led Zeppelin album, if anybody remembers that. They used it. And they were stunning, and they were suddenly all over the newspapers, and it had jumped. It had leapt in evolution almost overnight. And that began an evolution which has never really stopped since. You know, there are ebbs and there are flows, and there are certain styles and genres, if you want to call them that come and go. But it's kind of got to the point now where the sophistication is at such a level. Are they now more sophisticated than they were a few years ago? Hard to say, but they're exploring different things. But the jump-off point was 1990. Now, we do sometimes still get circles and rings, but far less than we used to. Because some said, well, okay, what's going on here is all the simple circles and rings are real. They're made by natural forces, the weather, and all the complex ones are man-made. But that falls down because, the effects that are inside the big complex ones seem to be identical to the ones in the small ones. And the small, simpler formations suddenly were decimated as soon as you got the big complex ones. You get some, and we still get some simple ones, but the ratio has changed to the degree where you have to conclude the same phenomenon evolved. It wasn't just something else leaping in. Now, it may be that there is a mechanism in nature that can create certain shapes, and something has come along and learned to use that natural mechanism and nudge it to create more complexity. And that's where you then get into the view, well, presumably that is some higher intelligence or higher technology, or there is some psychic projection thing, or there is some incredible chaos theory process at work. I mean, a number of formations over the years have looked like chaos theory patterns, or fractals to give them their true name, which are these very complex swirling shapes which will occur as a result of natural mathematics, which you can demonstrate clearly on a computer. And you also have the science of cymatics, which is where you vibrate sound through oil or water or anything like that. And you can get extraordinary patterns to occur by doing that. Now, why would this suddenly step up? But, we know there are things happening to the planet. There do seem to be changes. Whatever's causing that, could it be there is a more complex natural system evolving? Or, as we said earlier in this conversation, it's all of these things and maybe more all coming together in the middle. It may be not all crop formations are made by the same agency. And there might be a lot of crossover here. And that is one of the reasons why it is so hard to pin them down, why you can never quite get to the absolute truth of it. And even some people who've made man-made formations have admitted that they've had weird things happen to them that they really cannot explain, as if they were interacting with something else that was certainly not normal.
True, and that when you mentioned about the certain pattern, when it went from being circular into a slightly variation on that, it just turns the whole debate into a new direction. And there was a great line from the movie Prometheus with Ridley Scott, and there's a bit of it in the movie where one of the characters says God doesn't build in straight lines. Now, I'm not saying that this is a religious thing, but I just mean that, in nature there's certain patterns, and then when you start to introduce more angular shapes and unnatural looking shapes that are, still have beauty to them, it kind of pushes the whole thing into a new direction, right?
Well, yes, but clearly we should mention here, some formations are very clearly displaying intelligence. We've had star constellations shown to us, giving us dates and times, some of which seem to have predicted solar activity, interestingly. We have had faces that resemble clear ET faces. And famously, there was one in 2002 which literally shows you it's kind of made up from lines scanning across and getting wider and getting thinner. But when you kind of fuzz your eyes or you blur the image, there's this perfect image of a classic grey alien holding this disk of binary code. And the binary code translated into ASCII. Well, right, so ASCII is a known digital code which can generate text on a computer. And it turned out you could actually translate that into the human language. And that's the only one we've ever had. And it translated as something on the lines of, beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises, and so forth. And that is something which you have to say, okay, that's not natural. But equally, it was never claimed by any human circle maker. All these years on, that has never been explained. And there are others which have shown clear consciousness. So again, you come to this view that maybe there's something that can flatten crops, and it is used or nudged by different agencies, maybe some natural, others perhaps unnatural. And that is where you're left having to try to put all the pieces together. But it's also one of the things that makes it so completely compelling and fascinating after all of these years.
Yeah, and that one, the one you mentioned with the grey alien, is amazing. And so, you can always find examples of ones that are clearly, there's some sort of consciousness involved there. And as well as that, I was thinking, imagine if people tried to argue that those things are, it's just people with boards and strings, et cetera, et cetera. I kind of thought, well, that's the method, that's the purported method to actually make them, but you need to have the inspiration and the knowledge in the first place. So, some of them, to my limited understanding of the subject, you've got mathematics and geometry, you mentioned fractal patterns, you've got biology, astronomy, Mayan knowledge, and even more esoteric and occult symbology. If there's a group of people creating these patterns, they need to have this knowledge behind them in the first place, if you know what I mean.
Well, we should remember that a number of human circle makers, let's call them that, have claimed that they felt that they were being inspired by a higher power, some other, even extraterrestrial power. Now, what I always think about that is, how is that any stranger than a formation appearing by itself without them and a plank in between? It's strange because they seem to think that makes their claim somehow more credible. But to me, that's just as incredible. If they're saying that they're being guided by some incredible extraterrestrial force, why is it so weird to say, well, actually, the extraterrestrial force or whatever might just act without them some days because it doesn't really need them. It's just playing with them. So again, there's a kind of weird logic when they say things like that, because it still leaves you with more questions than answers.
And there's an interesting component to the whole debate, I suppose. When people say, not that it's exactly the same subject, but with the UFO thing, for example, if people say, I saw something in the sky and it definitely wasn't human because I've personally never seen anything that can fly or behave that way, and their mind is trying to rationalize it. There are, secret technologies or things that can be done on the earth that they're just not aware of. And, I suppose it's a real perceptual challenge for people to keep their minds open and to think maybe it's just something that they haven't encountered before.
Well, I mean, the UFO phenomenon has a number of things in common with the crop circle phenomenon, and one you've just touched on, which is that there's certainly probably more than one cause to a UFO. So if we put aside things that are clearly misreported, whether they be balloons or just people seeing normal things and misunderstanding what they are, you've still got a core of a lot of sightings that don't make sense that way. Now, because I give a lot of lectures to all kinds of groups, perfectly mainstream groups very often. I meet people all the time who come up to me and share their experiences with me, often about UFOs, the other one often about ghosts, funnily enough. And you realize these are qualified, professional, sensible people, often pilots, by the way, or often military personnel. And what they describe has no known immediate mundane explanation, especially objects that suddenly turn right angles very, very quickly in the sky. There is no known craft that does that. Now, there may be test craft that can do that we don't yet know of because it's not been announced in the mainstream. But even that, some believe that is stuff which has been copied from retrieved extraterrestrial vehicles, and that for years governments around the world have been trying to, create hybrids to make modern military technology. So it may be what we're seeing is we may well be seeing extraterrestrial craft, for want of a better word, and also military craft, and also some people, Andrew Collins has even suggested that there might be light forms which are in themselves creatures which live in the upper atmosphere. And actually there are a number of people believe this. So there might be all manner of things flying around above our head which have no immediate clear explanation. Again, this makes it more interesting and also more difficult to pin down all at the same time. But one thing is for sure, the UFO phenomenon does exist in terms of there are things flying around that simply have no clear normal explanation, whatever normal means, but you understand me. And we should bear in mind that there are people, I think it was the ex-Canadian Defence Minister has gone on record as saying we are aware of the existence of ETs. Now, why would he say that? Again, is it double bluff or is he just trying to tell the truth? We have a number of ex-military people, especially in America, who are part of the Disclosure Project, who have said we are all in contact, or we have seen evidence of extraterrestrials. We have astronauts who have said they saw UFO activity, and so on. And the list goes on. And you get to a point where you think there's either a lot of liars being paid to say this, or they're just telling the truth as they know it, and they want people to acknowledge it. And I suspect the latter is the truth. You're always going to get some people try and jump on a bandwagon, of course, and there is always some fraud, of course. But I do believe that there are things flying around which simply cannot be explained by anything mundane, and you cannot rule out that there are creatures on board some of these things. There's a lot of people who've had ET contact experiences. And even if you say, well, did it happen in physicality or did it just happen as a psychic experience? Even if it just happened in someone's mind, that doesn't necessarily mean there was no level of reality to it. Again, that's no weirder to me than men with bits of wood being guided by extraterrestrials. What's the difference? If people feel that they had an encounter with something that was on some other level of reality, we ought to listen. And John Mack, who was the professor of psychiatry at Harvard, he did years of study into this, trying to find out what's going on. Starting essentially from a skeptical standpoint, and he came to the conclusion eventually that there had to be some genuine phenomenon here. Whether it was happening physically or not, he couldn't say. And of course, he took a lot of stick for that. He's no longer with us now, but he did a lot of good work in showing, and others have too, that there is something here you cannot just dismiss. And that's the problem. You put on the mainstream news, and always there's a sneering tone. You try and report this stuff to anybody in the mainstream, there's an assumption instantly, oh, well, you're a moron if you believe that. And that, to me, is so foolish. It is so close-minded to the point of madness. And yet they accuse us of being the mad ones. You've got to address the evidence. And I mentioned briefly ghosts there, and the amount of people that I have met with the most astonishing stories. Sensible, qualified, professional people with no reason to make this up. And often they'll share it with somebody like me because I've just been standing up there talking about this stuff. So clearly I'm not going to ridicule them. And it's extraordinary. And I would say, just from my own observations, that about 1 in 10 people have either seen a ghost or either seen a UFO, and that's a lot of people. And even if you then disregard a lot of it as being mistakes or whatever, you're always left with a core of sightings and experiences that just cannot be explained away. And yet still they are. Now, still you put on the BBC and it'll tell you it's hallucinations, or it's some psychological damage you had in your child, or it's a draft making you think that you saw it. And that insults the intelligence on such a huge level. Yes, of course, some experiences can be explained that way, but not all of them. And that's what they always fail to grasp, which is, yes, just because you can explain something one way doesn't mean that's why and how it is always happening. But this is always what we're up against, of course.
Like you said, yeah, they shouldn't trivialize it because it's still something that there needs to be an explanation for it, whether it's extraterrestrials or whether it's something else we're not aware of. It should be analyzed and treated just like anything else. And it's one of those things you keep learning from over the years, I think, I've been aware of it myself, since the 90s. And then as you gain experience and knowledge in your life, you look at things in a different way. And I noticed that and you're the perfect man to talk to about this. I know that you're aware of that conspiracies do exist and have existed in the world, and they're a part of how the world operates. And many people may not accept that, or they're not really aware of it. And when you start to look into those things, you start to learn about things like esoteric knowledge and the occult and symbolism. And one of the things that kind of alarmed me slightly was when I start seeing things like the Masonic checkerboard floors, the hexagrams, the Kabbalic symbology, and the Illuminati pyramids. Now, it's interesting because those things could be from a sinister area, but they could be from us, people who were aware of them. But did you get that feeling when you saw them that it was a little bit kind of alarming almost?
Unquestionably, people in high positions of power do seem to have a very strong belief in the occult. And that's got very dark of late because people like David Icke and the accusations of paedophile rings and all of this, it's extremely worrying because if there's even a semi-truth to it, this is stuff which, of course, does suggest that people in power have basically no morals that we would recognize. But yes, I do think a lot of it is rooted in their belief in esoterica and the occult. And this goes back to the beginning of time as far as we can see. And I find it fascinating that many of the symbols still used to denote power today, and just take one very obvious one, and that is the pyramid, they go back so far. And I think that there is a belief that by using the ancient symbolism, and there's many other things, stone needles being the classic, look at Washington, that by using these things, they clearly believe they are in some way tapping into the actual power that was associated with these symbols many, many years ago. And how far this goes, we don't know. But in my book, The Truth Agenda, I discuss, perhaps their inherent belief in the Anunnaki and the idea that, we interacted with extraterrestrials thousands of years ago who influenced these symbols, who influenced these various things that they still seem to hold dear. I mean, I think Freemasonry is probably the least of our troubles. I mean, I think most Freemasons are just there for a cheap dinner and a bit of camaraderie. It's the people at the very top that I think have the secrets. And I think there are secret societies so secret we don't even know them. And yet, extraordinarily, I mean, if you take something like the Bohemian Club, which is this annual meeting in the woods in California, which was founded in the late 1800s, that is something which has strong occult overtones. They do a ceremony called the cremation of care, where they sacrifice the effigy of a child to a giant stone owl, as you do. And, of course, they always the people who've been to this, and this is the point I'm going to come to in a minute, they brush it off as a harmless pageant, but it's real. And many people feel deeply uncomfortable about it. Now, it's not denied. They can't deny it. John Ronson, who's generally a skeptic, but even he accepts that this was true. The Channel 4 journalist, writes for The Guardian, he broke in to the Bohemian Grove compound with Channel 4 cameras years ago and filmed it. I mean, you can watch this on YouTube. You cannot deny it. Harry Shearer, who does many of the voices on The Simpsons, he has attended it and he just says, it's harmless, don't worry about it. And yet, if it's so harmless, why not talk openly about it? Why do these things? And we know that there are side meetings, that's just the surface. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of big decisions get made at Bohemian Grove. For instance, the Manhattan Project, which first developed the atomic bomb, some of the first meetings took place there. So, big stuff's getting decided there. And, in a world where there are great fears about paedophile rings in high places, which they've managed to keep out of the public eye very well, just at the very basic level, sacrificing the effigy of a child is at the very least in very poor taste. And yet somehow they're not held to account for it. They won't discuss it, which is the clever thing. They won't deny it necessarily, but they won't discuss it. And this is going on to a degree where protesters even turn up at the gates of Bohemian Grove. They know when the meetings are, they know it's happening, and still you will not read about this in the mainstream for the most part. So this is the thing. A lot of the stuff is in plain sight. It is in the public's face, and still nobody responds until the mainstream is changed from below through a grassroots movement that cannot tolerate this kind of secrecy and, this kind of very worrying, dark stuff. It's going to carry on. And you can only hope that a consciousness will arise. And this is, I think, what we're all trying to do by keeping conversations alive about this, which the internet's gradually going to shut down, as we touched on earlier. You have to hope that a new consciousness will come in that will hold that in question and say, hang on a minute, this isn't the way to run the world, is it? But yeah, esoterica, the occult, it's everywhere in high places. Whether they just believe it because they don't want to take the chance that it might not be real, or whether they really do believe it and they are working for a satanic agenda or an extraterrestrial agenda, the whole reptilian agenda thing, I think it's very hard to say. But you are dealing at the end of the day with the same phenomenon. You're dealing with what they do, and what they get up to is clearly just on a surface level not right. And that is why it must be exposed.
Yeah, and it's an emotional issue as well. Like whether we're talking about crop circles or bigger picture stuff or conspiracies or geopolitics, everything becomes emotional and breaks down to the individual as well. And, especially when it comes to dark subjects or subjects that provoke a negative emotional response, sometimes people don't want to look at it. And that's, I suppose, down to the individual really. They have to be interested about how the world works and want to follow the truth wherever it leads, regardless of whether it makes them feel good or not.
Well, I mean, I think that's where perhaps those that pull the strings have done such a good job in basically encouraging people not to be interested. People are very easily distracted. Their lives are full of distraction from the media, social media. Their lives are full of things like debt. Once you're in debt, you haven't got the time to be sitting there reading about this kind of stuff. You're just trying to earn a living just to keep going. And we're all trained to be generally stupid. And that doesn't mean everybody is, and they're clearly not. And what I find very quickly is it doesn't take long to wake people up out of that. You just need to show them just a few things, and they'll come to their senses themselves. But still, you've got a very docile, on the whole, population, with the exception of France, maybe. But you know what I mean? In terms of what people will accept, people are very easily, they might roll their eyes and say, yeah, it's probably all run really terribly, isn't it? But, I can't worry about that. I've got to watch this or read this now, or that's the sad thing. We've been, I think, encouraged not to be too inquisitive, but that's not everybody. And what you have to do is reach the people that are still open to that to be sparked, and get them to try to be dominoes, because you only need to wake a few people up, and if their conviction, if what they believe actually has a ring of truth to it, other people around them can see that, and that's where you get the ripple effect, and people begin to see what it is that maybe a friend or a relative believes. And once they come to the evidence, and here's where not screaming at people makes a difference, if they can see for themselves that there is a reasonable and rational case to be made, people will actually wake up. And I've certainly found that in my life. They might start by being cynical. I mean, when I first got into crop circles, a lot of friends were very like, okay, come on, mate, come out of it now. And I wouldn't. And in the end, I would say, yes, but do you know this? And do you know that? And of course, the answer was no, they don't, because they'd never looked into it. And then they came, I think, to a level of, if not agreement with me necessarily, to a level of respect that I knew more about it than they did. And then they went, okay, fair enough. I can see this is something that works for you. But, there have been people that have then themselves become interested through that. And we all need to do that, whatever our particular area of interest is, whether it be exposing conspiracies or trying to discuss the paranormal or trying to push forward with a new spirituality and consciousness. You just need to have conviction, but don't shake your fist at people saying, you must believe me, because that's the worst thing. That's when they'll turn off. You just have to say, well, look, this is what works for me. And it comes back to where we started with this, really, which is that's what I try to do. I try to share this information in a way that is not bombarding them. It's trying to present it accessibly and reasonably, and then gradually leading people to the evidence so that they themselves can see it. And also just trying to expose some of the hypocrisy, because we're living in a world where I'm apparently mad for wanting to go and look at a shape and a feel, but people who are worshipping giant stone owls wearing funny robes are apparently entirely sane. So there we go. So I know where I'd rather be.
Well said, Andy. That's a great way to wrap things up as well. And long may we continue to just kind of put the information out there and make people think and kind of question the narratives. And you're right, it is you need to have resolve and to keep going, and regardless of what people think. And just as we finish up here, what have you got lined up? Have you got any public speaking tours or appearances happening? What's going on with you?
There's always lectures coming up. There's a network in Britain called the Funzing Network, and they're very good. They're aiming talks at younger people on the whole. Anybody can go. And I did a conspiracies tour just last autumn of all the big cities and got amazing turnouts. And it was very encouraging because it's some people often say, oh, younger people, they're all brain dead. They only look at the internet. Well, apparently not, because they're coming out. They've got inquisitive minds. They're there to listen. They're there to interact with real people in a hall. So that's offering great hope. I'm going to be doing more of those in 2019, and they're great because they're in good venues, easy to get to, and a lot of people come. So those and the other talks I do for all kinds of organizations, anything that's open to the public will be up on my website. So if anybody's interested, if they go to truthagenda.org, and just go to upcoming lectures, you'll see what's coming up. There's nothing up there yet. I'm about to upload all of next year's, but if they look in the next few weeks, if I'm speaking anywhere, they'll find me. And I hope perhaps in discussion now, I might come back to Ireland next November and maybe speak again at the Open Minds Conference, where I was back just a couple of months ago. So, I could be anywhere, but there is also, hopefully, under discussion, my book Conspiracies, which is published by Watkins, hoping there'll be a brand new version of that, updated, expanded, hopefully at some point coming up in the next year. So that's really my next big project. But I'm always speaking, always trying to get this stuff out there. And yes, I won't be bored, and hopefully other people won't be either.
Yeah. I always picture you as being busy, and that's brilliant. You've got so much going on. And of course, the website is truthagenda.org. And I like to do an introduction, before and after, and I'll cover all the details there. But anyway, thanks very much, Andy, for your time. It was a real pleasure. And I mean, there's so much we could talk about. We should probably do it again sometime and go into some other subjects. And, we can line one of those up at some stage.
Well, that would be lovely. But thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
Resolving Reality Radio. Thanks for listening. That was Andy Thomas of truthagenda.org. For more information on the crop circle phenomenon and the other topics that Andy covers, his fascinating books, videos and articles, visit the website www.truthagenda.org. Make sure to share this episode via your favourite social media or media platforms. Like, follow, share and subscribe. You can find all of those links on the Resolving Reality website. Also, don't forget you can now subscribe to Resolving Reality Radio on iTunes or Stitcher via your desktop or via the mobile apps. You can also download a high-quality WAV version of the episodes on the Resolving Reality SoundCloud profile. Also, keep an eye out for Resolving Reality videos, interviews and other pieces, which are coming soon and available on our YouTube channel, so please do like, comment, share and subscribe. For all those links, articles, audio and video content, visit www.resolvingreality.com. Thanks for listening to Resolving Reality Radio. We'll be back soon for our first episode of 2019, so until then, take care and enjoy Resolving Reality.